Konferansımızın Sürdürülebilir Bankacılık, Emsal Kurumlarından Uygulama Örnekleri konulu ikinci bölümünde Banco Itaú Sürdürülebilirlik Yöneticisi Sayın Denise ve Birleşmiş Milletler Kalkınma Programı Finans Girişimi Özel Danışmanı Sayın Tacon sunum yapacaktır.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope I can share some very nice examples about sustainability and about their implementation in non-bank in a developing country. I'm working with this issue in the last 5 years, and my background and my experience comes from financial industry. I started my career 20 years ago, and I work with so many things in financial, like wealth management, corporate banking, insurance bank. And I start my journey coming to this aspect or this part of my life after I start a new question in the bank about the innovation, about what we should do, what we may do to be a leader bank in South America or maybe in the world in the next few years. And after this project, I was invited to be head of sustainability area in my bank. And now I'll start talking about the Brazilian perspective, South American perspective, economic perspectives, and some parts of our broad of sustainability. And I hope these examples could help us, we and I, to implement this important strategy, including for emerging markets. I also say in a bank, when people ask me about the importance of this issue in my day or in the leadership day, I also answer this question with a phrase, with a comment. It's not about if is important. It's all about where is important, how could you do it. It's not a matter of if or not. It's now a matter of how and where and how could you use. It's not an option, including in emerging markets, believe me. And I'll try to show our journey and the strategy that we use to convince or including leadership and important person in Brazil and in our bank about this journey, okay? Okay, here you are. Some parts of, I don't know if anybody knows about the Brazilian perspective or economic profile, some numbers. And we are now in a very nice part of our economic growing, especially if you consider the aspects of economic growing in the world. And we are low in unemployment, emerging middle class is growing fast, and we are a very nice growing economy in a developing country. This is my bank. It's a result of a merger of two largest banks in Brazil in 2008. And this is the advertisement that we use to describe what the merger represents for us. It's the part of our commitment with the country. And we become a biggest bank in Southern Hemisphere, including South America. Big responsibility. I also say that some of our activities in the world, we are concentrate most in South America, but we have some branches and some activities in many parts of the world. Many segments, commercial and consumer banking and insurance company. We had not a bank, but 7 or 8 banks or financial institutions in the same company. But when we describe sustainability or when we act, including in other policies or politicians, we describe an unified policy. Some numbers, it's a funny number that my team chose to show you. Does anybody knows about these numbers? Look at that. 101 company in the biggest companies in the world are in the developing country, in the BRICS. And talking about banks, among of the 16 biggest banks in the world in market value, 5 from the BRICS, one is Itaú Banco. Our vote. Evolution of the issue, especially in developing countries and in Latin America, it starts like a trend, like a tendency, like a new technologies, behavior. Some colleagues mentioned internet, new youngers, and economic pressure, and goes to social articulation, like market initiatives, self-regulation. It's connected with social articulation between social and political articulation, just in the middle. Social commitments starts when principles like GRI, PRI, or nowadays PSI or Equator principles starts to move and get importance. And after that, moving towards legal basis. It starts to be like regulation. It starts to be part of the normal regulation of the country. Normally, when you talk about sustainability in growing companies or in growing countries, you can find this kind of way, this kind of route. And nowadays, I think in Brazil, and I don't know, maybe here, we are between just in the middle in social articulation and political articulation, because some self-regulation are becoming laws and regulations. Why this is so important? Because normally, during the period of trends, people are looking at the issue of the team like, okay, I don't know if I have it, I don't know if I have to be part of it, I don't know if it's important or not. But in the second point, the company starts to think about how. How could I do it? It's not a matter about if, but it's a matter about how. How could I include it? How could I put in place? How could I do it? And the third point, it's not a matter of how or if. It's have to do it. And I suggest, that's on a slide that I use it for my leadership, that we should start our route or our process between the first and the second step. Because some companies in Brazil leave the issue and intends to start the commitment only based on laws and regulation. It's not a very nice idea. I think it's a little bit late. It starts this route at this point. It's a little bit hot here. The sustainability road. I'll choose some risks that we consider, and I use the slide from an adaptation of a UNEP-FI initiative online course. And I chose some important things that I had in risks: regulatory and policy uncertainty, reputation that was mentioned before, climate change. It's becoming a new question coming from, especially for insurance company, because they affect directly the price of insurance. And nowadays in Brazil, we are having some impacts of climate change directly in the price of insurance company and insurance products. And the models that mention, that constructs and build the prices of these products are not adapted for considered things like that. And we have to start moving, including with partnership with academia and specialists, to build a new kind of model that can choose and can put in place this kind of aspects to measure and try to find another way to price these products. Special issues like pressure in Brazil are gaining a lot of expression, and the new thing that always people forget to mention is the opportunity, because especially in my experience, it's a little bit easier convince people based on risks. But when you focus only on risk, you forget the other side, the opportunity, and usually the results come from both sides. Managing risks and starts to try and find another opportunity to develop. And the side of the opportunity growing matters due to technology transfer and reputation. It's a common matter everywhere. I think it's normal. I think it's part of our management risks. It's reputation is so easy to mention, and we have a lot of examples around the world, including in Brazil. Some, and Marie mentioned before, like Belo Monte. When we had this kind of discussion in Brazil, it's one of the most important and biggest project that we had there. And it's not easy not be part of it. It's a very difficult decision because it sometimes represents lose market share. But it's life. The new kind of risk management have to consider aspects like that because it affects the cost and the calculation of the price of payment, the price of the investment. Because if you have a social pressure, social problem during the process that is around the process beginning many years ago and will be happening in the next 15 years of payment, if you have a social pressures or problems or environmental problem including, during this process you won't receive your money back. That is an example that I use to explain that things like that are not only a question of social and environmental matters. It's a question of finance, social, environmental, reputation, and result matters, connected. It's a new way to see the same thing, the same decision. Because things like that, 10 years ago, it wasn't happen. But nowadays, it's commonplace. That's why this kind of approach helps a lot when you are trying to convince or influence business people. How could we do it and how we start to do it? Both institutions, Itaú and Unibanco, had a very long history in environmental and social projects and trying to engage or using this process between connecting business process between social and environmental aspects. But in 2008, because of the merge, they start increase our responsibility and commitment with sustainability. We start a process into total organization between connecting our vision, our corporate culture, our brand proposition, including our voluntary commitments and others like indexes like sustainability, Dow Jones Index. And we had a sustainability index including in Brazil, and that we are part of it. And we start an internal and external reference, trying to find the expectations, to analyze and get a proposal to organization about how can we connect sustainability with our business. The process of connecting, including a very important part of this journey, because in the middle of the process, the bank declared its public our vision, and in our vision, the bank including the word sustainability in that way. Our vision is to be a leading bank in sustainable performance and customer satisfaction. And the next question that I used to talk to people, including outside and inside the bank, what the hell sustainable performance is for us. During this process, including when I talk about this with some of our executives, everybody knows what is it, but depends of in some parts of the organization, they are more connected with environmental aspects. In other parts of the organization, with social aspects. In other part of organization, it's all about risks. And in other one, opportunities. There are lots of visions about the same word. And we start a process to connect this vision into a promise or into a results of each business. And we start asking 3 questions that guide our constructions of the bank sustainability strategy. The first one is, what is sustainable performance, and what the relation between sustainable performance and sustainability. It's that different because some people ask about, was talking about, it's only a way to get more performance. Oh no, it's a new way to get the same performance. Okay, it's a question. The second one, we should be banks' priorities in sustainability, because at that time, I think it's because of the merger, they had so many priorities that included this kind of thing in this process. It was very difficult. And we start to choose, by choosing some, not more than in our approach, we would like to have not more than 3 or 5. And at that time, we used to mention 8 or 10 priorities. And when I think about priorities, if you have 10 priorities in a bank like that, you have no priority. And we start to discuss with people why and what it is our priorities in this issue. And the last one, how to connect sustainability with the business agenda and define the action strategy. How could I put this in the decision-making process? Because in a bank, when I have in Brazil, we had a bank with 100,000 people working every day. If you don't have policies, process, commitments, things that everybody knows how to act, you cannot work. The bank's, the process and the governance of the bank needs that approach to become better. And that's why we chose find a way to connect this agenda by business agenda, each by each business. The process, we start with interviews with the principal leaders of the organization, including our vice presidents and the president, and the main important directors and strategies of the bank. All the process of commitments and documents that I described before. We made some workshops with the representative of all business areas that we had in bank. It spent around 3 months to do it, and finished the process approving the results of the directors, map or drawing that I will show in the next, and presenting in our governance sustainability committee, and in the end approve in an executive committee with president and all the vice presidents to implement in the next year. What a sustainable performance is for us, it's more connected with share value. It was the answer of this process, not my answer, but it was the answer of all people that are part of this process. And it's share value, it's something connected with employees, clients, shareholders, and society to ensure the continuity of the business. It's more than license to operate. How could I be a leader? I could be a leader in the next 20 years without this. Only trying to generate value for this stockholders, that it's the main thing that normal business are thinking about. The process, continuing, choosing 3 strategical focus, and I don't know if this correct name, it's fronts guiding the implementation, but I think I'll describe the 3 strategical focuses, and after that how we conduct this process using the governance of the bank, normal governance, and changing the responsibility of these parts of the governance to include sustainability in their analysis. The meaning of the financial education, social environment, risks and opportunities, and dialogue and transparency. Financial education, it's a very big issue in Brazil. It's well connected with retail bank. As I mentioned before, we are now in a moment that we have a lot of people growing and getting more and more money, in our expertise as people, normal people in a country like Brazil, it's not much about credit. We don't use much credit. We start to use credit since in retail bank as a representative of part of business since 2004, I think so. And nowadays it represents a lot of part of our revenues, but it's not a common place for people in Brazil. They don't use much credit. They start to use loans for houses right now. It's a very short part of our revenues, and they don't know many things about credit or how to use or how to put this in place. People in Brazil many years ago was living with 1 or 2 products like credit cards and financial account, that's it. And nowadays they are living with 5, 6, 7, many problems, and they don't know what to deal with it. That's why the bank invests in financial education. Social and environmental risks and opportunities is about all the bank, but it's more related with commercial bank, with wholesale bank, with asset management, with risk management, and insurance company, so on. In dialogue and transparency, the new one, it's a quite new way to talk with each other and to talk with the market, to try to influence and contribute with our knowledge to implement this kind of approach, not so on in our business, but in our partnership with the government, our partnership with the FEBRABAN, that's a federation of banks in Brazil, and academia and specialists. How could we implement open dialogue with this kind of institutions to help each other in this journey? It's a very quite new for the bank talking about dialogue and transparency. I think it's what sustainability, enabling fronts, how could this thing could be part of our strategy in decision-making process. I think it's the best thing that I ever had in my entire life in sustainability in the last 5 years. Because when I can connect, and I have a permission to connect sustainability aspects to governance, to efficiency agenda of the bank, to culture agenda of the bank, and to incentive agenda of the bank, the things come to be faster and faster. I think it's a very nice example about how could you do the real inclusion of sustainability in the process, or a normal process. Because we had a special governance that I'll show you in the next slides, but the special governance of sustainability helps a lot when you have a problem, when the issue are emerging. But when the issue are coming practices in nowadays, in daily business, You have to be part of the normal governance, not have only a governance, a part of the normal governance of the bank. I think it's one of the most important things that we have done in the last process. Some examples. In credit, definition of a social environmental risk policy for credit to client companies with limit above 2.5 million. In 2012, I think it's the new number my team put here today. This is the number of the companies that we are analyzed under this policy. It's a big number for us. It's very important number for us. We are part of the Equator Principles. In 2012, the number it's 12 projects, but in 2011, 9 project finance analyzing and policy by Equator Principles. And I think Belo Monte, it's not in 2011, it was in 2010, I think is. And nowadays we sign in 2012, during Rio Plus 20, the principles of sustainable insurance. One example, we are part of PRI, and one thing that we use to connect this learning is we start to learn how could Equator Principles dealing with this issue, and after that, PRI using the same learning, but putting another way to analyze, and start to build, how could I say this, a self-knowledge about these principles. How could we do it, and how could we have done it before? And we start with the Equator Principles, and when we get to a PRI, we start to use the examples of Equator Principles to build a model to use in PRI analysis. Nowadays, we are trying to put some measurement in risks. We know the main issues in social, environmental, and finance by sector in PRI, and we started to build a model between a partnership in a university in Brazil to trying to build a model that has possible, I hope so, measure the impact of these things in business cash flow of the companies that has prices in stock markets. And after that, we can choose better, including this analysis, not only in perception, but only in the price of the stock markets. In 2012, more than 60% of our equities were mapped with ESG aspects, and the goal is achieve 8% of our total portfolio in 2013. And analysis parts, we use negative externalities, understand how they can become opportunity to be different, opportunity to gain more market, to have a better approach to our investments and a better approach to our investors. I had sometimes an example in a conference during something like that are happening here. And I met a guy that was a portfolio manager with a pension fund. I think it's European pension fund. And he was talking about a very important thing about PRI. It was an episode about British Petroleum, if I don't mind something. And he had part of the portfolio affected because they had this paper in our portfolio. And he was trying to explain that the big trouble was not have this kind of paper or investment in part of their portfolio, but explain what this investment is in a conservative portfolio, part of the conservative portfolio of their investment. And I think it's a very nice example about our responsibility and about what our clients or our investors are expecting of us. We are the specialists. We have to know or find a way to know how could we analyze and consider things like that in our decision, if the part of our investments or credit. I think it's a very nice example. It affects me a lot at that time, and I use sometimes this kind of example in many, many things, in many, many ways to explain. It's not an option. I also say it's part of our daily agenda. If you don't start with it, you have to. Other examples, we had some products. In Brazil, it's not common, but we start some products in insurance. And the first product in insurance by home with environmental service. We analyze your home and suggest, after the insurance product, we can check or find a specialist, and the specialist goes to your house and help you to find a way to include some environmental aspects, sometimes related with efficiency in your home. It's a free service that comes with the insurance for home. It's a new one. It's getting better and better. It's for us. People sometimes said, "Oh, it doesn't work. It not will happen." People don't think like that, and we start like a project, and nowadays it becomes a product. Mutual funds. We are growing fast in mutual funds. We had 2 funds. It's not new, but they become bigger in the last 2 or 3 years, especially because they are related with stock markets. Itaú's Social Excellence Fund is connected. The benchmark is our index of sustainability in our stock markets, and these indices are performing the last 3 years better than the normal index of Brazilian stock markets exchange. And I think it's a very good reason for investors. But by this example, we start to ask for people, when you invest your money, you have another opportunity, more than gain, more than have profitable investments and revenues. You have an opportunity to invest in things that you like, the things that you can influence. It's another way to start to think and use your money to influence markets. We start this kind of conversation with our clients, and especially in pension funds in Brazil that had a long-term view as a part of policies. The sustainability aspects for investments are gaining more and more space, are gaining more and more market. I think it's the same in Europe, in other countries, but in Brazil it's nowadays becoming more and more important because it's totally connected with the long-term view. Another alternative and another part of our business, microfinance. We start with microcredit because it's a very nice instrument of social inclusion, and we are only financing small entrepreneurs. It's a microfinance connected with these people, and we have here some numbers. We are not so big, but this project and this product is very important to test something new approach, like including financial education. The agents of microcredit use financial education when they lend money to the people, and they can improve by this strategy that the difference between this capacity of payment than the capacity of payment that people that don't have this kind of approach. And they learn that when they only give money, okay, they receive back, but when they give money and learn how to use it, because small entrepreneurs in Brazil have the same problem that retail and the normal person, they don't know everything about managing finance. They are very poor and income people. And when the agent act as a person that help us, this kind of people, to use the money, the results of the business are a lot better. The capacity of payments, it's like the double. It's a very interesting alternative. And other thing that is very important, and I'll mention after, it's measure. Because only because we measure this, we can prove or we can show the results of this differentiation, including financial education or not. Another part of our strategy, we report, we are committed with GRI. We are now discussing integrated report. I'm a little bit afraid because today, I'm not in Brazil, but we are now launching the first integrated report in the same day that we announce the financial results. We are now launching financial results connected with sustainability aspects. It's not the first time, but the first time that we can get together at the same day. And so far, so good. And now I hope it's getting better. But we start a journey to construct, because it's not about reporting, it's about thinking. It's about a way to build and to manage our business, not only relate the financial results with social and environmental aspects. It's about manage these three aspects during the business. And we start a journey, we think in maybe 5 years and so on. We start to have here at this process a very nice way to include in a normal days, in a normal thinking of people, a way to use or in better words, to manage the organization, consider total aspects, considering total impacts of the sustainability aspects into a business, not separately, financial and social environmental. And we started a lot of panels with stakeholders. It's a commonplace for us. It's a very nice experience because you heard things that you don't like, but it's something important to hear. But it's important because during this process you can find a way to put to leadership, to show to leadership what other people, not me, it's not me talking about sustainability aspects. When I make a panel with stakeholders, I have some answers, I have some points mentioned there that I can use to convince leadership that we have indeed pressure, problems, solutions, findings, expectation of society coming to us. And it's a very nice way to find reasons to do or to implement sustainability in our daily process. It helps a lot. In the other way too, it's a very nice way to show for our stakeholders what we are doing and if it's the right way to do or the things that we have to be done. Some examples of financial education. We have omni-learning. We start the financial education program, not only the clients, but we start with our employees. And nowadays, more than 8,000 employees represents like 8% of the company are trained by financial aspects of a financial expert at all, of a financial education, including how could we develop knowledge for our clients and without doing the same way these things for our employees. We start with the employees. And after we go to external campaign, conscious use of money, because it's not about use or not. It's about how to use, when to use. And more, it's the website, the photo is the website. It's a very nice and easy, it doesn't make sense for financial people because they use words, normal words for the commonplace. They don't use words like investment. They use words like your money, your life. It's totally connected with people in life, not connected with financial aspects. And we had a lot of access in 2011, and especially in consumption and best credit, because this is the main point, the most important points that the people are dealing in Brazil. And nowadays, this example, it was a video, but it was so heavy, I cannot put it in here. But we started a campaign, TV, a very big campaign that talks to you about how use credit. But when you have this, the last one, it starts with a mommy that are having a baby and starts to think about when you are planning something important in your life, you stop and plan. When you use credit, you should do the same way. It's more or less the approach of the campaign. It's a national campaign about credit, about selling credit, but with this kind of approach. It's an example because we are now, especially in financial education, I think in retail bank, we are now in a moment that this point is not an alternative. It's normal. It's part of our business, part of our campaign. It's part of our governance of product, and it becomes a normal aspect of the evaluation of the decision, and I think it's a very nice example. And I think the trick here, it was beginning with the commitment with employees, and after go to the clients, and after that go to the normal advertisement. And I think it's a very nice way to include. It reflects our commitment with the issue. In Brazil, we are acknowledged as a special bank in this aspect. And I described the governance. This is in the left, the sustainability governance. Sustainability Supervision Committee, it's related with our executive committee, and final approval comes from our president, of our CEO. And we had working groups that works with areas related with the issue. Financial education group works with retail banking. Social environmental risks and opportunity have areas like risk management, economic approach, financial, insurance bank, insurance company. In dialogue and transparency, it starts a group with institutional relation and investor relation, because we start to construct another approach to talk about these issues with the market. And in the other side, two examples of our normal governance with our influence. We start to participate of the process of products service evaluation committee in 2010, and in social environmental risk committee in 2008. And our vote could approve or deny a process or a project or a product. In the same way of regulations, law, our vote is representative. It's not part of advertisement. It's representative. And I think it shows a commitment with the organization and the point that we are nowadays. Measurement. Today we launched this panel. We had now, in 2011, a sustainability dashboard was created based on 3 strategies. These dashboards, it's used to measure and evaluate the growing of these commitments and measurements and goals through the organization. In the results of these panels, the colors represents okay or not okay. Red is it's not okay. Black, it's total don't think about black people also saying bank. And yellow is coming, but not in the track. It's a little bit not so good. Blue and green are okay. Blue are done, and green are coming on track. And we use this to control, because we are a very big organization with so many issues that we have some panels or some controls. And we put this measure here. They affect all the incentives. And today we have this panel. It's part of our commitment, and it's part of our normal governance. We show the results of the panel and the evolution to executive committee 4 times a year. And the best executives, the executives that gains a lot of implementation here, had a special goal or a special recognition because of that. It's integrates sustainability Dow Jones Index and corporate sustainability index of our stock markets, and support our sustainability governance, and include, in the next year we will include all of our commitments like GRI and other so on. We are connecting them and trying to build one indicator or two, or for some, and put is on this dashboard. It's a way to connect the 3 strategic focuses on different areas of the bank, because measure is very important. But in a big bank like I have Itaú in Brazil, it's very difficult to manage so many things during a year. And I don't like to discover that something that's not going in a good way only in the report moment. And we are now moving to decision-making process, and we are now moving to look forward a way to put these things on track in a normal management. Because if you have a business, a normal business, you have a panel, pipeline panel, or normal panel too, or normal ways to deal in, to manage. And with sustainability aspects, we was using a method like, I put a measure here, and a year before I'll measure again. It's not a right way to do it. And we are now moving to a more efficient way to management this. And conclusions, and so on. I think the best contribution that I could talk with you, it's about including these aspects in normal life. It's not an easy way. But I also say, as I mentioned before, that's not a way of if, it's a way of how. And there is no, in my point of view, there is no one organization, a leader organization, a very well management, very well managed organization in the future without this kind of aspects of our approach. Because the conclusion is that sustainability has a lot of benefits, and it's sometimes, especially in the bad times, in economic downtowns, in moments that the businesses are not so easy to deal, the people forget or try to. We don't have time to think about it. And I think in our experience, we use this kind of moment just to remember that things like that represents in some ways innovation, differentiation, things that could help you to be a better bank or financial institution or company, and trying to find another way or a right way to see the business considering the actual conditions. And that's why I chose some of these words, including one very important aspect for us. We are a very big bank. We discovered that this kind of approach attracts more people, especially youngest people. And can you imagine a bank leader in 10 years, 5 years, 12 years, 20 years without attracting people from very best universities in Brazil because of that. It's a matter, a very important matter, related with human resource, not financial risks, or it's other things that we use a lot of things to measure. Increasing market value, it's normal. Enhancing long-term decision-making. How could we choose a branch in Brazil without considering aspects of social and environmental pressures or difficulties? Or somebody once are showing for me a map with the new branches that we are planning for the next, I think so, 5 or 10 years. And like 10% of the new branch planning were in a place that if you consider aspects of climate change, we're gonna have problems with flood. And I talked to him and asked, do you know about this? Have you ever seen something like, no, why is a problem? Why is a problem? How could you sell something in a place like that? How could you live? How could you take a decision without considering things like that? And why this guy don't consider things like that? Because it's not normal, because it's quite new. And I think it's our responsibility is to help, not say these people you are wrong or right, but to help people to find a new ways to look at the same thing, but consider more aspects that will influence, sure, the results of the business, some days now, some days in the near future, some days in the long future, but will. That's why I think this kind of knowledge, it's not an option. It's part of our development. And I think I hope I can help you with my examples, and I'll finish my presentation. And if you have questions, something, or if you like to share or know about more of our projects, here you have my emails, questions, whatever. Thank you.
Hi. Doesn't matter. You've heard a number of speakers now saying it does, so hopefully I can convince. Long before most of you were born, there was a singer in the States called Bob Dylan, and he sang about the times that are changing. My belief is that the risks are changing, and they have changed already. So for banks who are going through a lot of tough times around the world at the moment, and have caused a lot of tough times, maybe it's time for them to realize that these risks are changing. We've got changing weather patterns out there. You've got two contrasts here. One, Turkey's rationing water because of drought. Another one is Turkey flooded. This is a pattern we've seen all over the place. And it's an issue that needs to be considered. Climate change is happening, and it's going to affect our customers more and more going forward. We've got man-made disasters. BP's been mentioned a couple of times. The latest estimation, $90 billion US in fines. Most companies would collapse under $19 billion of fines. BP probably won't. Bearing in mind my pension is probably invested in BP shares, I hope they don't. But it's a wake-up call for people to realize that this is not something you can play around with. It's something you've got to take seriously. The picture down at the bottom corner there is in the Pacific Ocean. That is the rubbish we, around this room, are putting out into the sea. Tailing dams collapsing, we see that quite often around the world. Those tailing dams contain toxic waste and chemicals, again, creating all sorts of damage for people and the environment. We as banks are probably financing that. We're probably financing all of this as well. And quite often we are financing it without the knowledge that that is happening, and that's where our money is going to. it comes back to understanding your customer. And somebody mentioned earlier about this whole thing about understanding your customer or knowing your customer. It's not knowing your customer just because of where the money that they're placing with you has come from and where it's going to. It's knowing your customer and how they operate, what their business model is, what rules they apply to their businesses and so on. And I'll come back to that in a minute. The worst thing I can think of is the fuel that bankers live on. Bankers live on coffee. It keeps them going until midnight. It keeps them doing the deal. The latest news is that the Arabica coffee, the best, is under threat because of climate change. How are we as bankers ever going to do our jobs if we haven't got a cup of coffee in front of us? Think about it. There are lots of external pressures out there as well. And those external pressures come from mainly NGOs, those nice friendly people who are going around checking on what the bankers are doing and what other people are doing. These are just some examples of it, but there are lots of others out there. And I've been party to NGO campaigns, and I've had to negotiate with NGOs to understand where they're coming from and hopefully explain where we're coming from as well. So what's that mean for the banks? Are banks tree huggers? By tree huggers, I mean, are banks supposed to now say, well, we won't finance anything because anything we touch could be an environmental or social risk, and therefore let's stand away from this? Or should banks be able to do business, but do it much smarter? And we've heard some examples of that already today. You've got the risks. They're the credit risks. It's the risks that are in the industry. Think about it. If companies that you are financing are in the textile industry and exporting to the major brand names, Marks and Spencer's, Gap, whatever, they have very, very clear and very strong requirements around environmental, social, etc. If the company you're financing can't meet those standards, they will either be helped to get there, or if they're not considered good enough, they will be dumped. They will lose their contract, they will lose cash flow, you'll have a bad debt on your hands. It's as simple as that, if you put it into logic. Understand the management risks. These are all risks that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. These are the normal credit risks that we look at. What is the management like? What do they know about the industry they're operating in? Do they understand the issues? You can apply the same about environment and social as much as you applied it on other issues as well. We've heard about collateral risk. Examples I've had are when the bank I worked for took over another bank in the States and acquired large tracts of desert, what we'd call desert. Unfortunately, it was highly polluted desert. It costs an awful lot of money to put that back into a fit-for-purpose state. However, once you put it back into a fit-for-purpose state, its value still doesn't reach what a normal market value would be, because buyers are then worried that you haven't got it quite fit for purpose, and there's another underlying problem sitting there waiting for you tomorrow. The biggest one of all, I think, is regulatory risk. That is changing quite rapidly, and is changing in some places quite subtly, and mention was made of the Nigerian banking principles earlier. Those are voluntary, but the regulators at the table, he was there helping those principles to be put in place. He's going to want to know why you as a bank are not actually implementing them. So it's those types of regulation that are coming in, but we've got in the EU very, very strong regulation that we need to take account of. There's lots of opportunity out there. I don't want everyone to think this is big risk territory. It is. But there's lots of opportunities out there, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Reputational risk. I worked for Standard Chartered Bank for an awful number of years. That's why I've got grey hair. But what we did was we had a reputational risk committee, and projects and deals were sent through to that committee. One of our board members turned round and said, "Why do you call it reputational risk? What are you worried about? If you think you can get away with it without your reputation being damaged, is that what you're trying to do?" What we were trying to do is to say whether we felt that we had a responsibility for that project or that deal, whether it was the right thing for the customer, the right thing for the country in which we operated in, and that we had done everything possible to minimize the environmental and social risks attached to it. There is no project in the world, I'll guarantee you, that does not have an environmental and social impact. So therefore, don't pretend that you can get away with it. Equator principles, etc., can't stop it. However, what is the best for the country? Does the country need a new airport? If so, where's the best place to place it? What are the best ways of doing it that mean the damage done is minimized? That's what it's all about. So the committee was changed, the responsibility and reputational risk committee, with responsibility being the keynote. Customers moving across to other banks that care. In the UK, we've had a situation where a number of banks have been cited for a number of dodgy practices, like fixing the LIBOR rate. What have we seen? We've seen that the co-op bank, who openly declare their strong ethical and governance structure, have gained an awful lot of customers. I'm not talking about the big corporate businesses. I'm talking about personal customers. I'm talking about small business. So people do care. And clearly your share price gets impacted by bad publicity. It's funny how share prices go down very quickly with bad publicity. It doesn't, good publicity seems to take a bit longer. It's like the oil price. IFC did a survey, Beyond Risks survey a little while ago. And one of the quotes I liked coming out of that survey was this one, that banks can no longer look at the commercial performance of a customer. They need to look at the much broader issues. And I think that is where we are today. They also looked at the sources of environmental risk for the FA client, so for your clients. And right up at the top is government, regulation becoming the key impact here. But also regulations in the export market. Remember I mentioned if you've got customers who are exporting, what are the rules and regulations placed on them? Because if they don't meet those rules and regulations, they're going to lose that business. You're going to lose a good customer maybe. Clearly you've got the media there with reputational risk, etc. And also the community and the impacts that your lending has on that community, etc. For the banks, obviously the big issue is non-performing loans. But how many banks in this room actually sit down and have a look at what really caused the loan to go bad? I'll guarantee we've done some work on this. And in most cases, cash flows have been an issue, but understanding what caused the cash flow to be impacted was not something that was done. And looking back at some of that, we found that it was environmental issues or social issues where contracts had been lost or not gained, etc. We've mentioned the collateral, we've mentioned reputational risk. There's been mention about international finance funding, etc. So there's a number of areas there that again impact on the finance industry. So have banks responded to this? In a way, sometimes they have. I've just taken some examples of some of the banks and their environmental statements, and I'm not going to go into those in great detail here. But most of those banks are putting up an environmental statement on a website and saying what they do. What I want to spend a bit more time on, though, was maybe just looking at the experience I had, because I started this journey in Standard Chartered because I didn't get away quick enough from the risk director who had this idea that banks should look at environmental risk, not social, environmental risk, as a key component of risk assessment. So I got volunteered. I'm a banker and I've been a banker all my life. I got volunteered to start finding out about environmental risk. And this was pretty much my journey from 1996 to 2008. We needed to understand some of the issues and the risk issues. And one of the key things that we had, Standard Chartered Bank is a bank that has headquarters in London, but most of its operations are around the world, particularly in emerging markets, in Asia, Africa, in the Middle East, and South Asia. Many of those markets are the manufacturing bases for the West, for the OECD. So we needed to understand what the laws were in the end market and the requirements and the pressures put on by the end market on our customers. And that was where the risk lay. The risk lay in our customers not being able to service the people that were buying their goods. So that's why we started looking at this risk. But the key problem we had was no one else was doing that. So I've heard this question come up many, many times, but the bank next door is not doing it, therefore we're suffering because we're losing customers. And that was the key problem that we saw. So one of the first things we did was to join the British Bankers Association that had just set up an environmental risk task force. That was invaluable because one of the things we saw was this was not a competitive issue. This was an issue of collective learning, particularly back in 1996. We were all starting the journey. UNEP-FI had only just really got going. But we were all starting this journey and trying to understand what the impacts were for us, etc. The British Bankers Association, we started doing some training programs for customers. So some of the banks would open up their banking halls in the evening and invite customers to the banking halls, bring in experts to talk about the law, the environmental laws that were now starting to affect these people. Our initial mistake was to hand over the whole idea of introducing environmental risk policy and processes and so on to a consultant. Let them go away, produce all the goods, bring them back and give them to us, get paid and leave. Not a good idea. We started again, and by starting again we worked with consultants to make sure that A, they understood us well, B, that they helped us in our aspirations and helped us deliver what we were trying to do. So we developed policy and we developed the due diligence process. That's relatively easy. The difficulty was selling this to people sitting in China, Indonesia, Zambia, India, Dubai, etc. Much more difficult because no banks in those countries were actually dealing with this. So therefore we were pioneering in many of the countries in which we were operating. Now, in some cases that was good news. In some cases, obviously, it was bad news. And yes, we did lose customers. If you started asking awkward questions, some people walked away. Yes, we were unpopular, we being risk, which is where I sat. Because risk, yet again, had set up a set of policies and processes that were stopping the business from doing what they were there for doing, getting revenue into the bank and earning big bonuses. We developed our own in-house training program. Initially that was workshops. Now we're talking 50-odd countries that we had to deliver these in. And there was myself. And I had somebody working for me who was working on the other side of my job. This was my night job, by the way. It wasn't my day job, by any manner of means. So I had to use this lady based in Singapore, and she helped me put together a training program And she and I flew around the world running these workshops in different countries. What it showed to us was that when we first went into many of the countries and started talking about this, eyes glazed over. What are you talking about? Waste of time. This is not for us. The bank next door is not doing it. When we started talking about the types of issues that arose, you started seeing some enlightenment. So, for instance, in India, I was doing a workshop there, and the guy said, look, this doesn't matter here. We don't have all those laws. It's all over with. Then one of the chaps said to me, just a minute. We had a customer who got closed down about 6 months ago because he did not, he was polluting the local river. His waste was being thrown out into the local river. But he said, I can't understand how it worked, because he said every 6 months he always got his environmental certificates signed off. And he said, suddenly it stopped. Well, either the bribe he was paying wasn't big enough anymore, or there was a change of personnel at the environment department. Whatever happened, something changed. So I said, okay, and what happened? He said, bad debt. They were closed, finished. He said, we tried to help them, but it was too late. So suddenly it dawned on them that that was the cause of their problem, and therefore they needed to watch that type of thing far more closely. One of the other big challenges, and I think this has been mentioned before as well, is the buy-in of senior management. And by senior management, I mean the board, and from everyone down from there, and particularly the heads of the business. Again, one of the big problems we had when it was initially done was there wasn't any engagement with those people. It was a risk initiative, and risk have put lots of policies out. This was just another one. And quite clearly, this was a complete change in the way the organization was moving. And whilst we saw it as a credit risk issue, everyone else was seeing it as something very different. So we had to go back and start the buy-in process. And that, I found, was probably the most interesting part of my time there. It was engaging with people, discussing with them what the issues were, seeing some of that enlightenment that I just talked about in India, but seeing that all around the world, and seeing senior management picking up on it and understanding what this meant for us as an organization and how best we can do it. This was all done, as again, with a very small team in London, me and my friend in Singapore. At about that same time, corporate affairs woke up to the idea that maybe this was something good and you could actually start expanding on it, and we'd start looking at sustainability reports and things like that. So there started to become some sort of help and assistance in this role. A couple of the areas that we found were very, very strong supporters for us, and the first one was UNEP-FI, which we joined as an organization in early 2000, and I was a representative for the bank to UNEP-FI right through until 2009 when I retired, culminating in Standard Chartered or myself becoming the chair of the UNEP-FI. I think we learned an awful lot being there. We learned a lot by being on the working groups, and anyone who's a member of UNEP-FI will know that you don't get any benefit out of it unless you're actually part of it. Walking around with a badge is not the deal. The deal is being there. So I got involved in a number of the various working groups. One of the biggest ones was the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI sector supplement, which meant that we had to work very closely with NGOs. And I think, again, that's a very important group of stakeholders to understand. We adopted the Equator Principles. Now, we only adopted the Equator Principles when it became clear that we were doing project finance. In other words, we set up a project finance team and then joined the Equator Principles. I've seen too many people joining the Equator Principles because, again, they thought it was the right thing to do. It's only the right thing to do if you're doing that type of business. But it does put an awful lot of pressures on you. it does mean that sometimes you're going to be the lone voice out there, particularly if you're dealing out in some of these countries that few or any banks have adopted Equator. The other lesson to be learned was to get our own house in order. Very embarrassing to go walking down to your customer and starting to say, what are you doing about the environment? What are you doing about health and safety? What are you doing about child labor, etc., etc.? And then they turn around and say, and what are you doing? You've got to do it as well. So what are you doing as an organization? Green building helps. But all your other policies help as well. And this is not giving £10 to the local charity. This is about showing that you mean business in all aspects of sustainability. You walk the talk, as it were. What we also found is that as we slowly started developing all of this process, was that it's all very well to talk about an environmental social risk policy or climate change policy, but there were specific areas which were of greater interest, A, because we had a large portfolio in those areas, or where NGOs and also other stakeholders saw us being a primary financial source to those areas. Palm oil being one example. So we started developing sector-specific policies, stating very, very clearly what we would and what we wouldn't do in those certain sectors, and what we would require our customers to be involved in, and how long we would give our customer to actually achieve those standards, and if they can't achieve it, what would happen, etc. The other area was products. And again, this is not all about risk, as I mentioned. It's around seeking opportunities. And before I left, Standard Chartered committed to the Clinton Initiative $10 billion of renewable energy products or projects. But there are a number of other initiatives going on at the same time. And train. How do you train thousands of staff? And the only way, and it's been mentioned already today, is using e-learning. We developed our own e-learning program with the help of an outside training supplier. It's not something you can sit down and do yourself. You've got the ideas, they've got the know-how of how to put that onto a training platform. It became an absolute requirement for all frontline bankers and all risk staff to have passed that online training course and get 80% pass rate. It also became required that all bankers, frontline bankers and risk staff had to attend a 2-week credit risk program in which embedded was a module on sustainability. But when I say embedded, it was embedded as a module, but it was also embedded in the total risk assessment process. So people understood that this was not something sitting on the side here for some guy with a science degree. It was embedded in the normal looks. And that's why I said, understanding the industry, what are the risks in the industry, what are the regulation requirements, etc. How's the management dealing with this? What are their processes? So what is the production process? What are the people buying their products demanding? What are their suppliers doing, etc. So we built it into that program. All bankers had to write an exam at the end of that 2 weeks, and at the end of the exam they had to get 65% pass, and they had 2 shots at it. After the second shot, they lost their credit rating, which meant they couldn't do the job. So training was a very, very important issue. As I mentioned, it's not there just to avoid danger, but also to look at opportunities. And this slide, just to set out some of the size of this green market out there. Picking up 10% of this, 5% of it, 2% of it, is a huge piece of business. So I want you to think about how that benefits the bank. So it's not all about risk and saying no, it's about risk and saying yes. Going out there and looking for that opportunity. So I believe that sustainability, A, does matter, and that it's a very good opportunity for the banking sector. Thank you.